Hi, Internet. My name is Crystal, and I'm a senior in the Geography and Environmental Resources program at the University of Alaska Southeast, and I worked on the project Scaling the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. The purpose of this project was to create a spatial representation of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and oil industry and the impacts it has on personal, local, national, and global scales. To examine these impacts, we looked at 6 different categories: mobility, history, politics, globalization, and representation. I focused on the representation and mobility categories for this project, and this video is going to take you on a tour I made on HistoryPin through the representations portion. I focused part of my representation research on how the pipeline was represented in newspapers and how the newspapers themselves chose to represent the pipeline. Newspapers have actually been around since the 1600s, the first one being printed in Germany. And since then, they've been a super popular way to disseminate information out to a wide audience, the public, because they're cheap, easy to make, they keep information flowing easily. So newspapers have been around for a long time, and they're still used today. When the pipeline was being built in the 70s, it was built really quickly in just a few years, and a lot of this construction was done in pipeline camps, which didn't receive very much media coverage, and in fact, there wasn't very much media coverage until the pipeline was actually completed in 1977. Later on, we see historically people go back and look at what happened in the camps, similar to what you might see in other forms of camps throughout history. This first slot on the tour shows 2 different newspaper articles from when the pipeline first started to have oil flow. The New York Times article is actually the day before, saying that the pipeline was delayed and people were just kind of tired of waiting for it. The second is from a Fairbanks newspaper, the Daily News Miner, and the headline is "Oil Flows Finally," which is very sarcastic, and it just kind of shows that they were not very excited for this pipeline to start. And you can see the entire newspaper has all sorts of different headlines on it that say "Jitters hold up startup 65 minutes," and everyone was just kind of nervous and not as excited as you might think when this giant engineering feat is about to come online for the first time. We can see moving forward in history, you have the big Valdez oil spill in 1989, which was all over the news and is still being researched today at the true impacts of what this spill did to Prince William Sound and to Alaska and possibly to the world. So this kind of a thing garners massive media attention, especially in newspapers, because you can get big headlines like this one, which is actually from a newspaper in Valdez, Alaska, where this spill happened. Says tanker breaks open on rocks, 200,000 barrels of crude oil spilled. And that is just a massive, massive amount of oil that was spilled, and it really messed up Valdez, as you would think, and animals, and it just has an innumerable amount of impacts on the environment and on the oil industry itself too, and on the entire state of Alaska. And you can see actually into the summer, people were thinking about not coming to Alaska, or maybe Alaska wasn't as pristine as you thought it was. So Alaska, and being reliant on tourism, started taking out ads in newspapers across the country. This ad here is from the LA Times, and it's an ad actually about the oil spill, comparing it to Marilyn Monroe, and they actually edited this picture of her and took out her beauty mark to show that even though she has one little blemish, she's still beautiful. Alaska has one little blemish, it's still beautiful. You can still come see Alaska, it's fine, we cleaned it up. So this ad was ran 4 times in the LA Times and in the New York Times all throughout the summer to try to encourage tourism to still be occurring up in Alaska, even though the pipeline spill had only occurred in one location. The effects can be seen throughout Alaska, and they were expecting this to happen too. Finally, even moving forward, so that spill happened in 1989. In 1993, we still see protests happening, and this is covered in newspapers, especially local ones, that see people making moves, and they don't want this oil to come in anymore, and they want their their land. They want to be able to fish. You know, they want to be able to do what they've always been doing. So this article, the original article is actually from that Valdez newspaper earlier, but it was reprinted nationally in the New York Times, showing that this issue got, while it was highly localized, the spill just in Valdez, we saw that it actually impacted all over Alaska and Prince William Sound, that it actually got national attention. So it ballooned from this little local story to this huge national outrage. And you actually see that about the pipeline in and of itself too. You see that it started as kind of just an Alaskan thing, and they're going to build this pipeline to get oil. And in the beginning, actually a lot of Alaskans were for it because Fairbanks had flooded a few years before the pipeline was set to start construction, so they needed money and jobs, so they said, okay, we'll help. And a lot of people wanted jobs. It was almost like a second, like, California gold rush, or a second Alaska gold rush, Klondike gold rush. And it just started from this very kind of local, statewide thing where only really local Alaskan papers were covering it, to the entire nation wanting to see what's going on with the pipeline, and why is Alaska letting the wilderness kind of be defiled by this pipeline. And there's tons of newspaper articles today about other similar projects that seem to be taking away the wilderness and open space from the people and giving it to big oil and to the oil industry. And it's interesting to see how things like this just happen all the time. And you can really follow a story by following newspaper coverage of the particular item that you're questioning. So that's my little tour on newspapers and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. You can check out the entire project on historypin.com with a link down below. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment down there and we'll take a look. Thanks.